Pyro Unleashed presents the Finale3D Tip of the Week, sponsored by Finale Fireworks.
All right, here we are. Another episode. Gonna dive into more about the effect editor. I know we kind of touched on it a little bit, and I guess we'll continue on and see where this goes. So, I think Donnie, one of the things we kind of want to touch on for this episode, I guess Drew, let's go ahead and figure out how to open up the effect editor if you want to start running that down, and then we'll kind of dive into I think let's build a fountain first, like a two-stage fountain, and then we'll kind of dive into the next effect that I think would be a good idea.
Okay, cool. All right, so first thing, just a little bit of background on the effect editor, what it is, and to contrast that with the way we created effects last time in our previous session. So every effect in Finale3D, whether you're going to use the effect editor or not, starts out with visual description language, VDL for short. So that it's always necessary to have some VDL skills in your quiver, as it were, in your toolbox, in order to get going. And then what the effect editor allows you to do is to make customizations to an effect that aren't possible using VDL. So let's create, to David's point, we can create a fountain that has that isn't really possible entirely with VDL alone. So let's go ahead and give that a try. So even though we're going to use the effect editor, we always start with VDL. So you have to create your sort of starting effect or your base effect with VDL. So if I go to Effects, Create Effect, that brings up the standard VDL Create Effect dialog. So in this example, I'll go ahead and create a fountain, and we'll just do something like 25 millimeter charcoal. That'll be the color of the sparks fountain. With let's do a blue ground flare. So what we're trying to create is a fountain that has a plume of gold sparks that cascade down.
Yep.
And then at the base of the fountain, we want a blue flame, right?
Yeah.
So I'll go ahead and add this to my effects, and I can, I don't have to specify anything else. I can, for simplicity, we can go with this. So let's go ahead and add this here. And then scroll till I can see it in my effects. There it is. And let's go ahead and drop this in the show. Take a look at it. So if we zoom in here, go ahead and take a look and see what we got. So it's pretty short at the moment. I can go ahead and edit that again in VDL and refine that. And let's say that we want it to be 5 meters. So go ahead and just add 5 meter there. And then we can see we'll get a much higher height. So now we can see what we've got is we've got the gold sparks, the charcoal, like the deep amber colored sparks, and we've got the blue flame, but the problem is they're going to the same height.
Yeah.
And so this is a scenario I've set up intentionally because it's a limitation of VDL. So VDL doesn't have the ability to specify the height for different parts of an effect, different parts of the same effect. So I've specified 5 meters. That's applying to both the charcoal fountain and the blue ground flare. And unfortunately, today, VDL doesn't allow you to control those heights separately.
Okay. Yeah.
So this is an application where the effect editor is really valuable. So if we right click on this effect, what we've been doing is going to edit this item VDL. And this is the same menu item that's used to edit racks, which we're not talking about, but don't be confused by the word rack here. When you want to edit an effect in the effect editor, you use this option here, edit in effect editor. This opens up a brand new show. So I had a show with 9 firing positions. This opens a new show where I can preview my effect as I'm working on it. So while I'm working in the effect editor, I have a show with a single firing position and a single instance of that effect. And then when I save and close, I'll go back to the show that I was working on, right? So it's just the one benefit or a benefit of using the effect editor, even if you don't want to change parameters that are required to be changed in the effect editor, is you can actually use the effect editor to edit VDL. So if I only work in this box up here, I can make changes to the VDL effect. And the benefit of this over using the normal edit effect dialog is I can see those changes in real time. So this is actually a good way even to create or to modify VDL effects, because I get to see what I'm doing in real time. So for example, if we change this from blue to red, now I can see in real time the changes that's having, whereas before I had to save and close and then look at the show to see what it looks like. So you can even use the effect editor when you don't plan or don't need to make changes to the tree, the specific structure of the effect, which is what we're going to do now. We need to do it, but it's a good tip to know that you don't have to. So I'll go back to blue.
Yeah, that's something I never really paid attention to.
I guess I never thought of that either.
Yeah, you could actually use the VDL directly in an effect editor like that.
Because I mean, that would honestly, because I do know that I've gone back in and created like a VDL, and I'll have to like go in there and I'll tweak a word, and then I'll go back and I'll tweak another word. Like, so doing this, man, that would make this is going to make life a lot easier.
So as we go through this video, there's going to be a lot of if you do VDL this, or if you do the effect editor that, and there's pros and cons to both. One of the things to know is that with VDL, you can edit individual effects and also effects like chains and cakes, right? Where there's multiple shots or multiple shells. The effect editor does not directly edit cakes. So if you create a cake, then you try to right click on it and edit it in the effect editor, that's not possible. So that is a limitation of the effect editor.
Yeah.
So you'd have to break the cake apart into its individual shots. Then you'd be able to edit the individual shots. Then you could put it back together. So best practice with the effect editor is use VDL. It's quickest and simplest for most common effects to use VDL. Make the best effect you can using VDL. Only use the effect editor when it's absolutely necessary. We've created an example here where that happens to be the case, right? We can't control the height of this blue flame without the effect editor. So we've tweaked this as much as we can here. And now what we're looking to do is fix the height of our blue flame. So this is where I want to introduce what we call this tree structure. I mentioned that earlier, but this tree structure has a series of what we call nodes, and each of those nodes has parameters, and all of those parameters allow you to almost infinitely customize the visual appearance and the performance of an effect. And of course, what you see in this tree changes depending on the kind of effect and a whole bunch of other aspects of the effect that you're editing. So in this case, we have our fountain and we have our flare. And so we have at the highest level, of course, we have the effect node. This shows us our pre-fire and any delay before simulation. A delay before simulation would be something like a burning visco fuse. So if this was a reloadable shell that had a burning visco fuse going down the tube, that would be a delay before the simulation. At the second level of the... Oh, sorry, go ahead, David.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, Donnie, I need to use that on those candles.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, that's a great application. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, as we go down the levels of the tree, you see there's indents here. So this is sort of what we call the parent node in the tree is the effect. Everything's under the effect. And then we have two launch nodes. One of the launch nodes, it's not, of course, the fountain isn't really being launched, right? Because it's just a nozzle from the ground. But that word is used for a mine, for a shell, for a comet. It's also used for a fountain. Yeah. It's the thing emanating from the ground. We also have a launch node for the flare. And there's a lot of things that are here to help you clue you in on what's what. For example, we have this concept of node VDL. Node VDL are words that exist in the nodes to help tell you what that node is for. Mm-hmm. There are also there are little arrows that you can use to expand and collapse the tree, the nodes in the tree, and they're color coded to match the color of the effect. So the reason these arrows are sort of amber colored is because this is the fountain. And I know immediately that these nodes apply to the blue flame because the blue. So that's to help guide you to the right place.
Never thought of that. That makes sense.
So our fountain, we're happy with it. We don't need to make any changes. In the interest of time, we'll just breeze right over that. Mm-hmm. But what we do care about is our blue flame. And so we've got all kinds of parameters. For example, here's height. Maybe we want this to be 0.5 meters instead of 5. So I'll just say I can just click there and, put a decimal point before the 5 and look at my sim, and I see, uh-oh, the height of the blue flame didn't change. So it looks like the height should cause this to change, but in this case, that's not the right parameter. So we need to go further. But here's a moment where I want to show you a trick. So you can spend a day, an afternoon, a weekend here tinkering with little things to try to get what you want. But instead, if you know how to create the thing you want or part of the thing you want with VDL, you can just capture that and use it instead. So I'm actually going to exit the effect editor without making any changes and show you how to harvest some parameters for the effect we want and then bring it in here, which is much easier if you have good knowledge of VDL than trying to tinker with all these little different settings to get exactly what you want. So now I've exited out. We didn't make any changes to our effect. Now I'm going to create just the ground flare effect. So take a look at this. We'll go up, we'll create an effect, and we'll stick with 25 millimeter. We'll do 0.5 meter as the height, and we'll just create a blue ground flare. And this is fine. I'll drop it in my effects. There it is. Let's put it over here on the timeline so it's not overlapping our fountain. And let's take a look. So there's our little blue. So you can see, here's our 5 meter blue ground flare. Here's the separate blue ground flare we just created. So we can go into the effect editor for this one, edit in effect editor, and there it is. Like, I'm far away here. I can zoom in with my mouse wheel. There it is. So I can actually harvest the parameters and then use them to create the other effects. I don't have to take a screenshot or a photo of my cell phone and punch in all these numbers separately. I can literally just go to any node and mouse over it and get the actions menu, and I can choose copy this node to clipboard. So if I want the parameters for the whole effect, I can copy its launch node. That will copy the launch parameters and anything underneath, any children or any nodes that are indented underneath that parent node. If I want just the star, I can copy there. If I want just the phase, I can copy there, et cetera, et cetera. So for this example, I want the whole effect. So I'll just go to Actions and choose Copy Node to Clipboard. So now it's on my system clipboard. I can exit this effect editor. I can come back to the one where we want to have the entire effect, right? This is our effect that contains both the fountain and the blue flare. Come into the effect editor, come over to where we have let's go ahead and zoom in on the effect so you can see the change in real time. Come over to our launch node and then do paste over node from clipboard. So the reason this is clickable right now is because there is a launch node on the clipboard. If there wasn't, the paste option wouldn't be available. So for example, if I go to the phase node, the paste is grayed out because I have a launch node on my clipboard. So it's actually not even that magical. If you were to pull up something like a text editor and do paste, you'd see there's what's on the clipboard.
Wow.
Essentially just VDL.
So it's node VDL.
Node VDL.
Yeah, which is different than like VDL in the normal context. But you could build yourself a Word doc or a spreadsheet with labels that contains all sorts of things, your own node libraries, we call it, like for your own different kinds of effects and stars and whatever you need. And then you can use that as a cheat sheet for building effects.
Yeah.
So, you might not do it for something as simple as a blue half-meter flare, but it is possible to do. And it dramatically speeds up the process of going in here and trying to tinker and tinker and tinker and tinker and tinker.
Yeah.
So I'll go ahead and do that. Actions, paste over node from clipboard, and bam. Now it's a little bit obscured because the position disk there, but if we hit play, now we've got the blue flare in the gold gerb. So it's awfully bright. So now I can make, a little tweak instead of making the massive amount of changes I would have had to make before by comparison. So for example, I could come in here to the spark trail, and it's a flame. It's not really a spark, but the terminology is recycled regardless.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to reduce the emit rate. So it's emitting 1,000 particles per second of the blue blobs that make up the flame. Yeah. And I'll just maybe turn that down to say 500. And we can see, to exaggerate, if I turn this down to a really small number like 10, you can see what happens. there's very little kind of blue coming up from the ground, right?
Yeah.
So I often like to click on the value and just hand key in a number. You can also drag the slider.
Yeah.
Right. So you can see as I drag that slider, that blue aura becomes much bigger. So if I know I want, something like 500 as the emit rate, there we go. I get something like that. So now we just click the green check, and as usual, Finale recognizes that we've updated an effect in my effects. It sees that effect part number in a show that I've opened, so it offers to update the effect in the show. I'll click yes, and now it's updated. I don't need this blue flare anymore. I don't even need the blue ground flare we put in my effects. I can delete that. What I really care about is this guy here.
Yeah.
And so there's our finished fountain.
Really kind of cool. That's really cool.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Couple more things to oh, sorry, Donnie, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, as we kind of come towards the end of this episode, can we maybe go back to that effects there a little bit and maybe look at like some of the values in there, maybe what some of those mean or represent?
Yeah, absolutely. Before we jump in, I want to mention something that happens when you do customize an effect in the effect editor. So I'm going to, let's say hypothetically, we wanted to change this in a way, like let's say we want the fountain to be 6 meters. Can we right click and do edit VDL? The answer is no.
Yeah.
So once we customize an effect, every effect starts as a VDL effect. And once we customize the effect in the effect editor, it's not broken. Like you could easily look at this and go, Finale's broken. This is just a long string. Anytime you see one of these long strings of characters inside what we call curly braces, which you have here at the beginning and here at the end, that's the representation of a custom sim. And it's represented that way because we went beyond what what English words or words in any language can represent. Yeah. So it's no longer human readable. And so for that reason, you can't change any of the parameters by using the standard VDL editor. Yeah. That also means that when you want to change if you want to change a specific aspect of the effect, like its size or its pre-fire or its duration or its height, all of those are different columns here. So if I click on the puzzle piece icon here, which is for editing, it unhides all of those columns like pre-fire, duration, height. Those are now meaningless. Okay. The only thing that affects how this simulation looks is that those characters that are in those curly braces that are stored in the VDL column. So if you have a VDL effect and you want to change the pre-fire, you can just click here and change the pre-fire. That changes the pre-fire. If you want to change the height, you can just type the new height here. But if I change this, let's just change this to 100 meters. Effect's exactly the same.
Yeah.
So you've gone through a one-way door, and when you go through that door, the only way to edit that effect going forward is to go back into the effect editor. And so for that reason, you lose some of the flexibility and the nimbleness that you get when you're, in comparison to VDL. So imagine you have a spreadsheet with 100 shells on it, and you realize all of your 3-inch shells need a slightly longer pre-fire because they're breaking late in your shows. If you can do a find and replace in a spreadsheet and update those all real quickly. If you make custom sims for all those shells, you got to come into the effect editor for every single one and edit the pre-fire. It's just how it works. It's not ideal, but it's how it works. So be aware of the pitfalls and the pros and cons, like unlimited control, but not necessarily as quick and efficient to edit. So
now is that input value, is that shareable like VDL is shareable? Like can you copy that and give it to somebody else and they can see the same effect?
Absolutely. So if you were to the best way to do that is to right click on this and choose copy visual description full VDL.
Okay.
And when you do that, here's my little notepad document here. If I paste in there it is. Wow. In this case, what I get is what was in the curly braces, because that is the only thing that affects that simulation. If I were to do that on, let's just take a standard VDL effect. Here's an aqua comet with a magenta mine. You can see this is a VDL effect because in the VDL column, there are human readable words. Yeah.
Yeah.
Notice that the VDL for the literal VDL for this effect is just Aqua Comet with Magenta Mine single shot. And the size is stored in the size column, and the duration is stored in the duration column, and the height is stored in the height column. They are stored in separate fields. So for a VDL effect, when I right click and say copy visual description, full VDL, I get the size, the height, the duration, and the VDL.
Yeah.
People say, give me your VDLs. But if you just give them your VDLs, you haven't given them enough.
Yeah.
They need the full visual description. And for a VDL effect, that actually comes from a series of different columns. And it's always easy to know which ones, because they're the ones that are listed here in the edit effect dialog.
Yeah.
So the short answer to your question is you can share an effect regardless of whether it's a VDL effect or a customized effect. What you share is always copied to what you need to share is always copied to the clipboard when you right click and do copy visual description. Donnie, you asked about going in the effect editor and looking at this a little more. Let's do that. Let's pop this back open. Okay. So any particular thing you have in mind?
I noticed on the blue ground flare,
Yeah.
I believe while it was in that spark trail, you had an awful lot of options in there, and it
Yeah.
seemed like an awful lot of options just for a colored spark trail. So I was just kind of curious what some of those maybe meant.
Yeah, so the reality is that the effect editor has a standardized framework. So regardless of whether you're making, a really beautiful strobing willow effect with microstars, or whether you're making just blue blobs of flame, all the parameters listed here are the same.
Yeah.
So, if we made a gold comet, the spark trail would have all these same parameters, just the values would be different for each one. So as I click on these, as I click on the names of the parameters, that's how I get that slider.
Gotcha.
Click here to change the value directly. But so we can, it's one thing I recommend that people do is, if you have the effect, just turning the knobs, as we call them, allows you to see, kind of what they do. So I'll give you an example here. The caliber in this context for a trail of sparks is just symbolic. Changing that doesn't so we made it 364 millimeters. That doesn't actually change the visual simulation. So why is it there? It's there because everything has a size, but not in this case. It's an example of something that it doesn't affect the appearance of the effect. Cool thing you can do in the effect editor is you can use a keyboard shortcut to undo. So if I press Control Z, I'm just holding it. It's undoing every action I've taken. Now I'm all the way back to where I was. I made hundreds of changes just by dragging that slider, but I can trail particle duration. So remember, we're kind of emitting blue blobs of fire. This is the duration that each one of those lasts, how long it lives. So as the blue comes out of the ground, it lasts for 0.1 seconds plus or minus the variance of 60%. So 0.1 seconds plus or minus 60%, and then it's going to effectively burn out and its life ends.
Now, what's the importance of using the variance in a lot of these cases of these effects?
That's a good question. So the reason is because there's variance in real life, right? Like sparks have different sizes and they don't all last like every spark isn't uniform. There's natural variance in the appearance of effects. Like imagine take the simple case of like a peony shell that has stars. If you saw all the stars perfectly burn out at exactly the same time, it would either be the best peony you ever saw, or more realistically, it would be too good to be true.
Yeah.
So in the simple case, the variance could be something like, if the stars last, if the nominal duration of some stars in a shell is 2 seconds, realistically, they're all going to burn out at a time around 2 seconds. And that's that plus or minus amount is the variance. So a crappy shell is going to have a large variance on the duration of those stars. And a better quality shell is going to have the stars that burn out more closely together. It's really easy to demonstrate that. You can just create a red peony here, and we can take a look. So here is a basic red peony. And if we go to, in this case, the phase, which controls the duration of these stars, we have a duration of 1.53 seconds plus 15%. If we make, let's say we make this exactly 2 and make the variance exactly 0, you'll see what happens here. The stars, they do fade out, but they all fade out perfectly together.
Exactly the same, yeah.
If we add some variance, let's exaggerate it. Let's add a variance of like 90%. Now we can see some of the star already started to fade out.
Yeah.
There's some more fading out. There's some more fading out. So this is more realistic, albeit that's a pretty bad example. This is where the stars were not rolled consistently at all, right? So again, this is an example where turning that knob makes it easy to visually, if you're looking closely at the effect, you can see what change you're having on the effect by turning the knob. Of course, you can spend an endless amount of time doing that, but I'm gonna go back here to our original effect. So that's kind of our variance. We also, you also have wind friction. I'm kind of just going down the list here.
Yeah.
Let me zoom back in. You have wind friction, and this impacts how the particle moves through the air or the spark, right? So like, think about the difference between what I like to use is the analogy of like a feather versus a bowling ball. Like if you have a launcher that launches feathers and a launcher that launches bowling balls, and you launch a feather, no matter how hard you launch a feather, even if you launch it at a initial velocity of 1,000 miles an hour, because of the amount of wind friction on it, it'll kind of like, it'll go boom, and it'll just, wind pushes on it, and then it decelerates very rapidly.
Yeah.
You launch a bowling ball at 1,000 miles an hour, it can push through that wind, and it kind of travels. It sort of looks like it has a, it can force its way through, and it kind of has a more gradual, slower deceleration.
Yeah.
So a good way to represent that is like a red, let's say a red comet, right? So let me go ahead and zoom out a little bit so we can see this effect. 3 inches awfully big. Let's do 35 millimeters, say. 35 millimeter red comet. So just kind of take a look at the motion that you get as this rises up. It looks sort of like a slow, gradual motion, right?
Yeah.
And it's obviously decelerating due to gravity, but the wind friction is a huge factor. So if we come up to this launch node here and we look at the wind friction on this launch, it's pretty low right now. Low wind friction means the wind's not decelerating it very quickly. If we crank this up, let's exaggerate it to like, let's say 75%. Watch what happens now. So it's being launched like a feather, right? So Finale is recognizing that we want to get it to a height of 70 meters. So we just basically poured a ton of lift powder in that tube to just blast that feather to try to get it to 70 meters, which is probably impossible. But that's what's happening. So that it's got an insane amount of muzzle velocity, and then it's decelerating very rapidly, and it's just sort of stopping and sort of floating at the top. So a ton of wind friction. If we exaggerate that on the other end of the spectrum, take it all the way down to 0, now it just kind of keeps going and burns out on the way up. The wind is really it has low wind friction, so there's really little deceleration as a result of the wind pushing on it. So there's a lot to know here, but those are the kinds of things that really affect. And I hate to say the word effect because we're talking about effect, but impact the look of the effect. So we've got the emit speed. So that affects how far out things are being dispersed. So for example, in this case, the emit speed is actually the thing that affects how far these blue flames get thrown. But in the normal context, it's really a function of the particular effect. So let's take a gold comet, for example. So go ahead and make a gold comet. And this will really make use some adjectives, adjustment terms, very thick. So we made a gold comet with a super thick trail, right? Now let's go in here and look at the emit speed. So the emit speed is what speed the sparks that are like released from the comet, that are emitted from the comet, have. So watch what happens as I drag this.
Whoa.
So those sparks now are being like ejected off that burning puck or burning star as it flies into the air. So if you want to have a really wide, thick trail of sparks, the thickness is more about the density of sparks, but let's call it a fat trail, right? Then that's your emit speed. If you have, your emit speed at 0, those sparks are staying like right in line behind the comet as it burns. So in the common case, the blue flame really wasn't a good example. In the common case, emit speed has a lot to do with, how fast those sparks are emitted. This really comes into play when you have an effect like a red strobing willow. Here's a red strobing. Let's make a shell. So here's a 3-inch red strobing willow. You'll notice that you have multiple things going on here. You have your charcoal amberish colored trail of sparks, and you have your red microstars. So that's actually 2 trails in the effect editor. And the red microstars get thrown off a little bit further, right? It's a little bit fatter than the charcoal. And so for that reason, that's why you're seeing a larger emit speed value on the red microstars than you are on the charcoal. And of course, I call them it, as soon as I say that, I come in and the values are the same. But there are other factors like the wind friction that affect it. But you can see I can increase how far those red strobing microstars are thrown off. I can increase the emit rate so you can really see them, right?
Oh, there we go.
Wow.
So we're just exaggerating it to give the example.
Now that would be a cool show.
We're sending this one over to China to get made, right?
Yeah, exactly. Only versus this one, where these are much smaller particles. But you can see there, if I make the kind of charcoal, the trunk, fatter by changing its emit speed. So dialing up and down the emit speed really impacts the look that you get. So,
I mean, a lot of these are very, very granular type of adjustments that, I mean, most of us are never going to probably be playing with a lot of these. Yeah.
Yeah, that's 100% right. And so, this is why best practices generally get as close as you can with VDL, because we made, the VDL terms that represent effects were created, their simulations were created using the effect editor. Yeah. So somebody sat down and tweaked all these parameters and then said, this is red strobing willow. Mm-hmm. And then we put that into the code for the application so that when you type red strobing willow, you get the right collection of parameters to give you what you want. So you don't have to come in here and do all of this tweaking. But in the case, which is not all that uncommon, where Finale just doesn't give you a good look, then it's useful to know, what these do. So the list continues. You have inherent velocity, you have the emit rate, we've played with that. You have the emit rate curve, which dictates over the lifetime of a star, at what rate over that time are the sparks being given off, right? Do most of the gold sparks burn off the comet at the beginning of its trajectory or at the end of its trajectory? That would be a function of the emit rate curve. So you can see the curve shows a lot of sparks are coming off at the beginning of the life of this charcoal trail. And at the end, it kind of, as the star burns out, the amount of sparks coming off goes down, right? So lots of control there, lots of emit rate curves to choose from, built-in ones, you can make your own, so on and so forth. So as we get down in here, these are the trail parameters, these are the spark parameters. So this controls, this size actually does matter. So this is controlling the size of your sparks. So there I exaggerated really large sparks. Imagine you put a very large, metal powder or granular metal or, flake of metal in your composition. That's how you might get, very large sparks. Like charcoal sparks usually are really fine and small, but like, if you've got a coarse aluminum in there, you might have a really big, bright spark, right? Like a tie comet, right? Or a time rain comet is those big, kind of bright silver colored or kind of goldish silverish colored sparks. You get, this is going to be more interesting if we come down to the red. You get the ability to control the color that in this case, we're talking about these red microstars. Mm-hmm. Get the ability to control their start color and their end color. So what color as they're born, as they emerge from the spark trail, what color do they start out as and what color do they end up as, right? So you could have sparks that change from one color to another. That's not super realistic, but sometimes there are some subtleties in real life that you might want to do. It's not realistic that a spark is going to change from being green to red, or stars do change from green to red.
Yeah.
This isn't generally the way you would do that, but this is for more subtle applications. I'm hitting Control Z here to undo. Then you have color temperature, and this is a characteristic of the color you can use to add realism. So if you've got kind of a crappy washed out red, as opposed to like a real pure, vivid, like ruby red, then color temperature can help you achieve that. So you'll see, this is just really bright right now. Let's kind of dial this back there so we can see the red better. So watch what happens as I increase. I'll just crank up the color temperature here on this red, and then also on the start and end.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was I had the wrong trail selected. That was the charcoal sparks, but we do that. You can see the same effect there. So if I do it on the red, you'll see. So this is a really pure red, and if you see, if I crank that up,
yeah, it gets a lot more.
You get a really you start to get that washed out red look.
Yeah.
Not as good of a composition. So playing with color and color temperature, you can create really realistic looks for different effects. Spark intensity. This is just a multiplier on the size, so it increases, the brightness basically and size of the sparks. And then you have the intensity curve. So this is the intensity of the sparks over their life. So this represents a glittering or a strobing, a spark or star that goes bright then dim, then bright then dim, then bright then dim. This is a charted version of that. So the x-axis is time, and the y-axis is the luminosity or brightness or intensity.
Cool.
Right? So if stars that are just standard stars, they might just look like this, right? Where there they are. They're coming into existence, and then it's a little confusing having two trails here. I'll just delete the charcoal. So here's just the red, the washed out red, and you can see they just kind of appear and then they burn out, right?
Yeah.
And so if we instead do, something like strobing, now we'll see that they're flashing.
Okay, there you go.
Oh, yeah.
Right, so that's the intensity curve of the stars or of the spark trail. So
Very interesting.
Yeah, so there's we're just sort of scratching the surface with this, but it does take a little bit of knowing where to look when you're looking at an effect. But you can see in real time the impact you're having on an effect by kind of dialing up and dialing those knobs.
Yeah.
Customization. So yeah.
Perfect.
Cool. Very cool, man. I think this is a great spot here. I think to kind of wrap up this segment here and really want to thank Drew for spending some time here with us this week and really kind of dived into some of the granularities on the effect editor. Like this is really kind of new, cool to kind of see. And obviously a lot of us aren't going to have a lot of use cases for this granularity of detail, but if you really want to get in, you really want to perfect what your effect looks like, there's really great opportunities to kind of dive into some of these options and really kind of fine tune. And it's kind of cool for them to play around with that.
Yeah. Yep. I agree.
So again, guys, another great episode here on our finale tip of the week. We're probably going to be ramping these up here probably to pretty close to probably more of a weekly kind of basis here. Now we're kind of about halfway through the series, and I know we're going to probably, I think, create another effect here probably on the next episode you're going to see. And so again, catch you guys on Wednesdays for our regular scheduled episodes. Go out there to pyrounleashedpodcast.com. Check out our website, merch, Discord, all that cool stuff. And as always, check out finalefireworks.com for some information on getting Finale. And in the meantime, go out there and unleash your inner pyro with us.
This has been another episode of Pyro Unleashed. Come back each week for more industry insights, technical tips, and awesome pyro designs. Have fun out there, be safe, and as always, remember to unleash your inner pyro with us.